This is the new Volkswagen Polo, and although it's a heavily updated version of the outgoing model, VW has worked seriously hard to try and up the level of luxury in its Super Mini. Now, the company has crammed the car full of technology to help it go up against the likes of the Ford Fiesta and the Mini. However, the last time it did that with the Volkswagen Golf, things didn't go too well. Today, I'm going to find out if they've done any better with the Polo. But before I go any further, if you like what we do, why not give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. This new Polo is what's often referred to as a facelift, meaning that underneath it's still very similar to the outgoing model, but we've got some light changes on the outside to freshen up the car's looks. For example, we have a new headlight design, whereas on the old car you kind of had this weird squiggly line at the base of the headlights. Now we've got these two strips that run down the base of the headlight, which have a slightly sleeker look. There's also a new front bumper, which I think looks a little bit sportier, and this isn't the R-Line version. Plus there's a light-up bar in the centre of the grille, which admittedly I think looks a little bit weird on other VWs, but because it's a little bit lower down on this new Polo, it seems to work just a little bit better. On this model, we've got the 16-inch wheels, but you can also get 17s or 18s as optional extras. And down the side of the car, it's pretty much exactly the same as its predecessor. But the big changes are at the back of the car. Now, on the old Polo, the tail lights were these kind of little blobs, but now they extend further into the boot lid. And that's been done for two reasons. One is to bring it in line with the VW Golf, which is the Polo's bigger sibling, and two, it's actually a trick of the eye, because if you have wider tail lights, it actually makes the car look wider than it actually is. Couple that with the new Volkswagen logo, and the Polo name now sits in the middle of the boot lid rather than off to one side. Design-wise, the interior is relatively similar to the outgoing model. We still get a couple of cup holders in the center console. We've got a little storage tray, an armrest with a little storage bin within it, and also a little phone holder down in the center console. But the big new addition here is the new steering wheel. And bearing in mind this is your primary touch point, it feels great that Volkswagen has put so much attention into it, and it feels like a proper premium product. Not only is it lovely to hold, but it's the same style and build quality that you get on the likes of the more expensive Golf and also the ID3 and ID4 EVs. Crucially though, is that you get physical buttons. So if you don't like those weird haptic feedback controls that you get on the Golf and the ID products, you're going to be really happy to see that you get physical buttons on the Polo. That being said, it brings me on to all the new tech features that come in the new Polo, and it's a little bit of a mixed bag. So on the negative side of things, we now have touch controls for the climate settings. Now, this applies to mid-level cars and up, and although it's an improvement over the Golf because you now have illuminated hot and cold sliders, it just doesn't really work as well as having just a physical dial like you get on the absolute entry-level cars. At least you can now see it at night, but I just think it's a bit of a downgrade over having physical buttons. There are also now 3 different screen sizes to choose from for the infotainment display. Now, what we have here is the mid-spec one, which means that you do get physical dials for the volume and also tuning the radio. But if you go for the absolute top spec system, it will look like what you get on the new Volkswagen Golf, but it's also really quite fiddly because there are no physical button shortcuts whatsoever. So if anything, I'd recommend saving £800 or so and going for the mid-spec infotainment system, which comes standard on all but the absolute entry-level car. The same thing goes for the digital instrument cluster, but I actually think it's one of the best features that Volkswagen has thrown in, because these digital instrument clusters, particularly on cheaper cars, can make it feel so much more premium and advanced than its price tag would suggest. And the same goes here for the Polo. It's great to see it come standard on all cars, but the entry-level one. And that leads me on very neatly to price. Now, the entry-level Life car comes in at just over £18,000, and the top spec R-Line comes in at a little over 21 grand. Now, if you want the GTI, that's a £27,000 car, which actually makes it more expensive than the excellent Hyundai i20N hot hatch, and you can watch my review of that by clicking the link in the top right hand corner. Now that does make the Polo a little bit more expensive than the Ford Fiesta. However, that's also before you start adding on options. Even if you go for the R-Line, which you would kind of expect to be one of the more well-equipped models, you're still going to be paying over £300 for heated seats. And again, over £300 for keyless go. And if you want the most advanced touchscreen out there, then it's an £825 option. Rear space has always been a strong suit in the Polo, so I've got the driver's seat in my position and knee room is pretty damn good. But headroom is the thing I'm most impressed by. This is a very small car, yet I feel really comfortable in the back of it. The same can't be said for the Ford Fiesta. Naturally, it's pretty basic back here. There's no armrest at all, so you're just going to have to keep your arms to yourself. But there are a couple of USB-C chargers, so if you want to charge your phone up on the go or a tablet or whatever, you can do so. Boot space is unchanged at 351 litres, but that's still one of the largest boots out there for a Super Mini. It's considerably larger than the Ford Fiesta and also the Mini. However, you do get a very slightly larger boot on this Seat Ibiza, which is actually based on the VW Polo, and you can watch my review of that by clicking the link in the top right hand corner. Now back to the Polo, one of the great things is we actually have a movable boot floor, so we can lower it if we want to open up a little bit more space. However, it's worth bearing in mind that if you go for the optional Beat sound system, the amp is actually located underneath the boot floor and you won't be able to lower it to open up a bit more room. You also get space for a spare wheel, but it's a £100 optional extra and doesn't come as standard. Do you ever miss the days of where engines didn't come with turbochargers and they were good old-fashioned naturally aspirated units? Well, you're in luck because the new Volkswagen Polo comes with a 1 litre 3-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. Problem is that it only produces 80 horsepower. So you're going to want to get the turbocharged model, which comes with either 95 or 110 horsepower if you want to get up a hill. Now, the 80 comes with a 5-speed manual gearbox, but the 95 can be had with either the manual or a 7-speed DSG, whereas the 110 is DSG only. And if you want a hot hatch, then you're going to want to go for the Polo GTI, which packs a 2-litre engine producing 207 horsepower. But it only comes with a 7-speed DSG. You don't get it as a manual. Come on, VW. The Polo might not be the sportiest or most fun Super Mini out there, but it is really lovely to drive. Now, all the controls at first feel nice and light, so it's really easy to maneuver. But there's enough sensation there to feel like you're actually driving a bigger car than you are. It's really typical for Super Minis to feel really small and quite nimble, whereas I almost feel like I'm driving a Golf. In fact, in many ways, I find this drives a little bit better than a Golf. You've got really lovely steering, which has got a nice bit of feel to it, even though it's nice and light. And these pedals feel lovely. The clutch is really light, but there's still quite a distinct bite to it, and you don't usually find that in, let's say, the equivalent Skoda. Now, admittedly, a Fiesta does feel a little bit more rewarding to drive than the Polo, but if you want something nice and simple that's easy, but can still be a little bit fun on a twisty road, then the Polo really delivers. Now, you can option in sport suspension, which lowers the car a little bit and also gives you a slightly firmer setup. I would say it's not really worth going for unless you went for something like the GTI, because as standard, the Polo's got a really lovely smooth ride, but you don't get lots of body roll in the corners either. So it feels like a really well sorted out chassis, and I feel like going for the sport suspension would just mess with that a little bit. Now, onto the engines. We've got the 110 horsepower engine in this car, and it's quite funny because there's actually a noticeable amount of turbo lag. So when you put your foot down, it does feel a little bit slow at first, and then you feel the whoosh of the turbo kicking in and suddenly you're off. That may also be a result of the 5-speed gearbox. Perhaps if you went for the DSG, it might be able to manage the turbo lag just a little bit better. But in all fairness, while it doesn't feel like the most refined thing, it's actually quite a lot of fun. And speaking of refinement, being a 3-cylinder engine, when you're up and running, it feels perfectly fine. It's actually really quiet for a 3-cylinder as well. The only problem is when you come to a standstill, or if you're kind of idling at traffic lights, it can just feel a little bit clattery and a bit rattly. So you kind of find that you get vibrations sent through the cabin that you wouldn't do if this car had a 4-cylinder engine. Now, you get some core semi-autonomous features included as standard on the Polo, even on the base spec life car. That includes lane keep assistance and also autonomous emergency braking. So if someone comes out in front of your car, the car will slam the brakes on for you. You do also get adaptive cruise control included as standard a little bit further up the range as well. So although you can spend money on adding options to your Polo, when it comes to making it feel like an advanced car with handy semi-autonomous driving modes, a lot of that is actually included in the base price. And so this new Polo, I actually think, is one of the best ones that VW has done for quite a while, because you don't have to pay big money to get a really well-equipped car. Yes, there are some things that are left off the standard equipment list that I wish were included in the price, such as heated seats. I can't believe that's a cost option on an R-Line. But in general, the core tech, such as the decent screens and also the semi-autonomous driving modes, all come bundled in if you go for the mid-spec style that we have here. And I think with the added tech, the Polo does feel like a slightly more premium proposition compared to a Ford Fiesta. So while I think VW took a step backwards when it teched up the Golf, they seem to have struck the right balance with the new Polo.